Hello, Catherine.
Hi Laurel, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Well, thank you for
Thanks.
having me for a little chat today. I'm very
And
excited to talk to you about the new record.
thank you for joining me. Um, shall we just get on the way?
Yeah, let's go. What have you got for me?
Well, I have questions about the fantastic new album that is As We Once Were. Thank you
I'm
for
already
the
blushing.
thank you for the privilege of being able to listen to it prior to the interview. So I have questions ready about some of the tracks on the album. So the first is Throw Over Your Man. You've described as a queer anthem, and you have a PhD in queer theory. Can you just kind of give a brief explanation for the uninitiated as to what exactly queer theory is?
Well, I guess in relation to this song, it's a song that was written or inspired by the love letters between Virginia Woolf, who was a writer in the Bloomsbury set in the kind of early 1900s, and Vita Sackville West. Now, both of these women were married to men, but they had I don't know if we call it a torrid, but an intense and meaningful love affair. And all of their letters are collected together in all these different volumes that you can get. And they were really important to me as a teenager, sort of trying to figure out who I was and where I kind of fitted in the world. And as I say, for years and years and years, I've wanted to write a song based on these letters. And the one in particular that is a letter that Virginia writes to Vita Sackville West, where she invites her for lunch by the Thames. And she says, throw over your man and come and, have wine with me and essentially come and get drunk. And, it's a debauched lunch invitation. And I always thought it would make a really, really good title for a song. And it's one of those songs that's just been kind of sitting in my head as an idea to kind of do, but it never really fitted sort of with any of the themes of my prior records. Um, and then obviously I started writing about the past and the signposts that the past gives us for this album, and it felt like a natural fit. How that relates to my PhD, which is so for those of you that don't know, I have a PhD in English literature from UCL in London, and adjacent to that is sort of it's a PhD in American epic poetry with an angle or a framework that is a queer theory framework. So my PhD, I'm trying to think of a way to put this that's as sort of easily digestible as possible. It looks at um, long poems written by some of the most famous and most prominent American poets who have all been men and who all happened to be in some form or other gay, queer, however you'd like to frame it. And I guess what interested me about this was the idea that an epic poem should, as T.S. Eliot said, tell the tale of the tribe. It's usually somebody who speaks for the nation, who speaks for all of us. And obviously, there's a fundamental tension here when we have someone who is a gay male who, at all of these historical moments in time, would have been criminalized, outcast, othered, an outsider. So I was really interested in the way that kind of literature made space for these people who had been othered in every other context in their lives, in a lot of cases, put on trial or jailed or um, criminalized for the love that they had for another man, how they were kind of authorized and okay to be the voice of the American nation. So I found that really, really interesting. And that's sort of what the PhD is about. And I turned it into a book that's published by Bloomsbury as well called Whitman's Queer Children, if anyone wants to read it. But yeah, I guess queer theory kind of looks at, um, well, in a literary context, it doesn't just sort of spot queer characters or spot queer writers, but it looks at the way identity is constructed and performed, and gender is constructed and performed, rather than something that might be kind of essentially bestowed, which I know is a very controversial topic right now. And hence why someone who studied queer theory 20 years ago, as I did, finds it all quite interesting that it's become such a hot topic right now, because queer theory just accepts that identity and gender is constructed and performed, and that we can adopt whatever we feel is the right identity for us. But I won't open that can of worms. But just to say that all of this obviously gave birth to Throw Over Your Man, which is a sort of semi-duet, accidental duet with James Dean Bradfield and the Manic Street Preachers on the new record. And he kind of brings like the male energy to the song. And then I had my kind of queer choir of women in the background, so lots of my friends who are producers and artists and performers who kind of stacked up all the vocals in the background. And yeah, we just had a lot of fun making it.
Brilliant. The title track, As We Once Were, plays as a song that is accepting or now seemingly comfortable with a past relationship. Is that a fair assessment of the song and what you hoped was inferred from it?
Oh, it's quite tricky. I never like to sort of place an absolute meaning on songs because I always want there to be space for the listener to kind of take their own interpretation from it. And that's actually something I really learned from my time in Simple Minds, actually, the sense of that the lyrics are sort of nebulous enough that there's opacity in there so that you can kind of bring your own meaning to it. So I guess what I would say is that my intentions with the song were for it to sort of anatomize a past relationship. So this was inspired by a relationship that began in my mid-teens, actually, and went on for a decade, and was a very important, if not a very positive relationship in my life. And the fact that I've moved back to live near where a lot of these scenes happened. So I guess I'm kind of turning over that nostalgia of that kind of first love, that teenage relationship with new eyes, with adult eyes, thinking about the perspective that I have now and what that means to me. So I'm not sure there's a conclusion to the song. I guess the conclusion is the chorus, we can't ever be the same as we once were. And whether the listener wants to think of that as a good thing or a bad thing.
That was how I interpret it, as a kind of like, we've changed and that's okay because people change.
Yeah, I guess I was really inspired by, there's a song by Tom Waits called Martha that I've always been really obsessed with, that imagines sort of him calling what I think of as his first love and telling her how important she was to him, and how that those feelings sort of still in some way kind of arched across the years. There's also another song by Rufus Wainwright called The Art Teacher that I absolutely adore too, that has quite a similar theme, looking back at a formative relationship and how much it's impacted you even though you're in a new relationship now. So I guess to some extent, when I started writing it, I thought I want to write a song like that captures that strange bittersweet feeling of what it's like to look back at someone that you did love, rightly or wrongly, for a very long time, and what that's like now you're in a very different place in your life, and what you might say to them were you to pick up the phone. It's a strange one. As I say, I'm not sure it has a conclusion, but I think it's a feeling that most of us can relate to, right? We've all had that first formative relationship, and now we're all either marching towards middle age or in middle age, and that brings with it its own kind of inherent nostalgia and sort of wistfulness for who we were when we were younger. And I guess I was sort of trying to reject that in some way and think, oh God, I wouldn't want to be 19 again for all of the money in the world. I hated it, and how much happier I have been in my 30s. I think that's been like my happiest decade. And not many people can say that. I think we're kind of fed this idea that, the peak of your happiness will be, when you're at university or in your youth. And I just haven't found that to be true at all. I found myself getting, I wouldn't say happier is maybe an adjective I wouldn't use, but just more content and not as miserable.
I think I've gone through a similar process, like, because I keep on thinking about the sort of adage that is youth is wasted on the young, and so I find myself quite often thinking I'd like to have the energy and the kind of the actual, like, yeah, just really the energy, and not so much the body, because my body wasn't there, but just the energy of youthfulness, But now, like, I
Yeah.
could do so much if I had the energy that I had when I was younger. But that's
Yeah.
the only thing I would want. Just
I,
the energy. Just the
I think
energy.
because I was so unwell in my early 20s, I was quite chronically ill for about sort of 6 years, like desperately unwell. I don't have that kind of nostalgia for those years in particular
Mm.
because I was so sick. Like, I spent a lot of time in and out of hospital and had a lot of problems that were undiagnosed. And I feel sort of, yeah, I guess that's a different perspective, isn't it? Maybe for most people, they were the kind of their healthiest and sort of most energetic years, whereas for me, I was sort of like really deathly ill, and it was only once I got a handle on my diagnoses that I kind of worked out, okay, here's how to stay alive, kind of thing. Because I had undiagnosed celiac disease, which almost
Mm.
killed me. So yeah, that's really interesting to think about. I never thought that other people might feel quite wistful for those years. But I think that's sort of what the whole record is about. It's about kind of reframing the past and thinking, well, you can't change it. We can't go back
Mm.
there. But how can it provide us with something kind of meaningful to go forwards with? How can we learn something from it? Both personally speaking from our own individual histories, but also more broadly, right? We look at history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, hopefully, or
Also,
not.
I think because of that, I find that it ends on a very hopeful note, particularly with the voice of your daughter at the end as well. I think that just makes it just a wonderful ending, in that there's a future there. Is kind of what I take from that. Is you
Yeah,
know.
and that was very kind of purposeful with kind of bookending the album with the voice of my grandmother who's passed away, and then the voice of my daughter, obviously, who's carrying on like her genetic legacy, but also I think a lot of her personality. We are a family of the lineage of feisty women in the Davies line. And yeah, it does feel hopeful. I think I derive a lot of joy from my child and, whatever and whoever she wants to be. And although I've been so incredibly private about her, I did sort of feel as if she was an integral part of what I wanted to say on the record. And so her voice is there at moments when it pops up. She's very cute. I'm biased though.
No, she is. I love it, and that end, the end also just brings a tear to my eye as well. Like, just the loveliness of her voice, and just how it ends on what I think is such a uplifting, hopeful note. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It's such a personal record for me. It's been whenever you make a record, I know it sounds mad to sort of say you don't really think about sharing it with other people, or I don't think you should when you're trying to make an art piece, which I always think of it as. I'm very lucky in that I've never had, a big major label A&R guy kind of breathing down my neck. I've made all of my records exactly as I've wanted, and they've all been lucky enough to, pick up that kind of acclaim and, a level of success that, I could never have dreamt of without ever having to change anything about what I've wanted to do. And obviously, this has been in many ways, a deeply personal project, but I've also been very mindful the whole time that it must resonate beyond that. That, we all have families, we all have pasts, we all have things we need to unpick from our past and make sense of. So it's been that balancing act of holding these deeply personal and very detailed elements from my own history, but wanting to make sure I leave enough space for the listener to sort of feel included in that. And that's quite a hard tightrope to walk, I think.
You have struck a wonderful balance with that.
Thank you.
The next question I have is about Hand to the Tide, which you have just released as the last track before the album is released. And it has a Dolby Atmos mix. Can you talk about the pros and cons of Dolby Atmos, and why there is a single track of the album and not the entire album
I mean, it
on?
purely comes down to economics. So when you mix in Dolby Atmos, you're essentially paying for the entire album to be mixed again. that is one of the most costly parts of the process for me in making a record, obviously, to work with people who are very excellent at what they do. And quite interestingly, actually, I'm just realizing another Simple Minds connection. So Lewis Chapman, who did the Dolby Atmos mix for Hand to the Tide, used to be Andy Wright's assistant. Actually, that's where I first met him years ago, when I was in the studio with Andy, actually. So there's that connection there, but it's a very specialized process and a very costly process. So I just couldn't afford to do the whole album as well, because I'd already had the album mixed by Dave Eringer, who worked with the Manics, and he did a marvelous, marvelous job. And also Mick O'Gordon, who works with The Smile and Idols, mixed another track on the album, Hand to the Tide, the album version. So really the reason why is purely and simply money, in that it would have been a wonderful thing to do, but it would have been really foolish, given that it's not the dominant format. Most people still listen in stereo. But I was really keen for this song in particular to explore its possibilities, its spatial qualities. So for those of you who don't know what Dolby Atmos is, rather than having two speakers where you've got kind of left and right, you can have as many as you like, depending on the system you're listening on. But essentially, you're creating a sound in space. It can go up and down, left and right, forwards and backwards. It's three-dimensional sound design. And obviously, those of you might, hopefully you'll be hearing it by the time this comes out. Hand to the Tide is a song with so much detail and depth in it. It lends itself really well to a sort of a spatial mix. But you can hear this through Apple Music and Tidal as well, just with a normal set of headphones. They have an algorithmic kind of program that enables you to sort of replicate that spatial feeling. So you just have to click to the Dolby Atmos mix and you can just listen on normal headphones, which I find quite exciting because it's accessible, right? You don't have to buy 14 speakers to be able to listen. But it's a really exciting format for those of us like me, who are really interested in record production and mixing. I think the thing that they haven't quite solved yet is the accessibility in terms of access to have your records mixed without an enormous budget. And it's something I'm probably going to tackle next in terms of my own skill set. So I mixed versions myself, the last record. And probably what I'd like to do is to upskill to be able to mix my own records in Dolby Atmos. And then, yes, there's the cost, but just the cost of time then. And so that's next on my list of skills to acquire, I think.
That would be a good skill to have. And let's hope you can do that. The next question I have is about happiness don't show up like it should. I'm interested in the reversed voice that's on it. Can you explain why the usage of a reverse voice?
Well, I guess it's sort of the really obvious answer is that for every record that I do, I like the sort of record production choices to echo the concepts and the themes of the record itself. So with The Art of Losing, which was all about kind of grief and the chaos that sort of extreme loss brings you, I was obsessed with this speaker called the Leslie cabinet, which has sort of two horns, as it were, that spin round really, really quickly. And you can reamp things through this and then put two microphones either side of it. And it sort of sounds like everything's spinning and you're underwater. And I use this to sort of represent the way that grief felt to me. And I guess obviously as this new record, As We Once Were, is about revisiting the past, that the most obvious way to represent that in terms of record production is to look at techniques of reversal. And there's lots of things in terms of the instruments where instruments get reversed, and obviously there's the tape of my grandmother's voice that was itself reversed before I reclaimed it and restored it. And then here obviously the voice reversals as well. The record starts with my daughter's voice actually reversed. She's not speaking Welsh, it sounds like she is, but so I used a lot of that to kind of represent this idea of physically rewinding to the past and going backwards. It sounds kind of cliched, but it sort of works. I think it creates some really interesting effects as well. It's much underutilized with melody, I think. And here in Happiness Don't Show Up Like It Should, it becomes the main part, the melody of the song. And I just had so much fun doing this. As soon as I hit upon this section that I reversed, I was like, that's just sounds like another language. I absolutely love it. And there are so many bands that have used this technique. I really love the way Radiohead have used it, or Tom York in particular, in his solo work as well. So I'm a big fan of the artful reversal, and obviously it neatly ties with the theme of the record, which is very pleasing to me.
You have said that She Knows Her Place is a kind of sequel, or for want of a better term, to the Beatles' She's Leaving Home. Can can you tell me about that? Like,
I mean,
and also sorry, also there is spoken words in Welsh on there as well. Can you sort of tell us about that as well? Or can you explain what the
I
Welsh
can
words
indeed.
are?
So it says a child is not a poem is not a child. There is no either or. And I guess what I was trying to capture there, and they're the words from Margaret Atwood's poem Spelling, which I guess essentially she's talking about this idea of why do we have to choose between art and procreation as women? You know, men don't tend to have to make that choice, but often as women we're posed that question about whether your kind of artistic or music career will end if you choose to have a child. Um, and I think I'd always wanted to write something of a sequel to She's Leaving Home by the Beatles. I love the song, I'm obsessed with it. I love the way it's like a mini novella. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. But I'd always wondered what happened to that girl who thinks that she's pursuing freedom and, you know, leaving to meet the man from the motor trade, you know, when in all likelihood she would probably have ended up in some kind of domestic cage of a different sort. You know, she thinks she's leaving her home and the restrictions that her parents impose upon her. Well, let's be realistic, at the time she was probably just entering a different constraint in a marriage. So I guess I wanted to imagine what that life might look like, and um, this is what She Knows Her Place kind of turned into, a sort of a fictional piece about that girl as we fast forward 10 or 15 years into her life. And at the end, there's sort of a collage of voices. We've got Gweno on there, we've got Patrick Jones, who's a Welsh poet and the brother of Nicky Wire from the Manics. Um, there's some kind of vintage educational videos as well about postnatal depression. And they kind of all collide at the end in a sort of Pink Floyd-esque. Well, I guess it's very similar as well to, you know, Dream of Sheep from Hounds of Love by Kate Bush is another record I'm completely obsessed with. And I really like to be able to sort of push the boundaries and kind of bring in things beyond just like lead vocal that kind of flesh out the story. So this is one of my favorites to put together. It was a lot of fun. Again, I had a great time putting this track together, as you can probably hear.
Your daughter's voice can be heard throughout the album. How has parenthood changed the way you approach the creative process?
Oh, I mean, it's completely upended it. You know, anyone who becomes a parent, but I think especially mothers who tend to be the primary caregiver, what happens is that your creative hours are completely compressed. Now, I've kind of hit the point now when my daughter's at school. So my kind of working hours will tend to be 9 till 3, you know, school hours. Um, but what you miss more than anything is the sort of runway time, as I call it, you know, that time just to think or to get into that creative process. So now I'm almost in a panic. I must start something. I must be productive straight away because I've only got 5 hours before she's back. Um, so I've become so efficient. I look back now at how I made the art of losing, all those long studio hours and the procrastination and the amount of time that I spent on my own, just not necessarily accomplishing that much. And I think how indulgent. So it's a very different way of making a record. In some ways, there are lots of things that are still the same. You know, it is mostly me just sat in front of my computer in my studio with all of these my outboard gear, experimenting, editing things, and you know, it's me from, you know, comping the drums all the way through to engineering the vocals. That's, you know, while I've been a little more collaborative on this record in terms of bringing in kind of guest vocals and additional instrumentalists, kind of add icing on the cake, you know, the bulk of it is still the house is built by me, and then I get other people to do the decoration kind of thing at the end. So it's a long and arduous process, which I love, otherwise I wouldn't do it. There are much quicker ways to make a record. But I don't have a team of engineers and assistants and people kind of at my beck and call. Hence the name the Anchoress, right? It's working alone, working in a very solitary manner. And I derive a lot of joy out of that, but it is a big task, and hence why it does take me a couple of years to make a record of this complexity. It would take anybody that long, but obviously my hours are slightly shorter. I can't do 12-hour days in the studios. So yeah, it's changed my process, but I try not to be it has changed it, and I accept it rather than sort of moaning about it. I think I was very resistant in the early years when I made versions when she was very young. I panicked and I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to make a record again, an original record. But you adjust over time, and you learn just to accept that this is the new reality, and you find a way, and you learn to be more patient, which I have, and hope that the fans are just as patient, which you have been.
And it has been absolutely worth the wait. I mean, I was thinking earlier that there are a number of artists that have kind of started with a debut album, and that debut album gets such recognition, and then maybe the follow-ups aren't so great, and they either fall by the wayside or they struggle for a while. But you are one of the artists that is just getting better and better and stronger and stronger.
I mean, I set the bar really high for myself. That first record was very much a compromise because I was doing my PhD at the time. I had lots of part-time jobs. I joined Simple Minds, and I was stretched in so many different directions. I think, while I'm proud of the record, and it did really well in terms of, it was nominated for the Welsh Music Prize, it was HMV's Welsh Album of the Year as well, and it got a lot of critical acclaim. That I look back at it now, sort of 10 years on, and think there are things that I would change about it to make it a better record, to make it more cohesive. And I might do that actually, because the rights revert to me next year. So I have the opportunity, if I want to rejig it and to put it out in the world in the way that I maybe would want to see it now. But I think I've just set the bar really high, because when you're a woman in this industry, I think people are ripe to suggest that everything that you do is attributed to the nearest man in your vicinity. And when I made The Art of Losing, I was so stubbornly resolved to show them all I could do it on my own and make something better. And I did it. Without sounding arrogant, I did a record that many people had on their albums of the year list. It was up there in so many kind of critics lists, and I'm still so proud of that record. I know I did a really great job at doing something that wasn't expected, and I did it on my own, and that feels really important. And I think I was worried. I'd be lying if I wasn't worried when I started this record to think, oh my goodness, I've done this thing that everybody said was great. Should I put another record out now and spoil that potentially by not doing something that's not as good? So the whole time I was thinking, I'm not going to put it out unless it's as good as The Art of Losing, and I really want it to be better, because I should be better, right? I should be a better writer, a better arranger, a better producer. I've been producing other people's records. I've been writing songs with other people for their projects. I've done so much more in the 5 years since The Art of Losing came out. Of course I should be better. And, there's a maturity there as well. I've got so much more to write about. And I think, like you say, some people rest on the laurels of past successes. And I'm just not interested in that. I'm so self-critical. And again, that's another reason it's taken so long, because I wrote a lot of songs for this record that aren't on there, and I kind of pushed off because I didn't feel that they did meet the bar. And again, me, I'm not an arrogant person, but I confidently feel that I've made a work of quality and of complexity and of a standard that I feel proud of, and I have really high standards. And the reviews thus far have been just amazing. Again, it's just, you have that moment when you first put it out there and you let kind of music writers hear it, because they have to hear it a few months before it comes out, and it is quite nerve-wracking, because you do think, especially when you've had a really successful critical record before, that they're just going to kind of say, well, it's not as good as the last one. But yeah, all the reviews so far have just been really amazing, if not kind of better than last time, and that's, you breathe like a sigh of relief and kind of go, phew, it was worth it. It was worth all of the hard work. And I think that's it as well. Like, I have this like work ethic too. It's like, you can't just think because you made something good before that you're just, I've never thought of music making as something that's like, I am, I received the gift, I am gifted. It's, you work bloody hard and you make something just by sheer graft. To me, I approach it like building a house, like bricklaying. You put the work in, the sweat and the effort. And I wonder maybe if other people just sort of get a little bit sort of lazy with it. I don't know. It's all I know is I won't let something out in the world unless I'm proud of it and I'm really hard to please. But I think it's just circumstances are different as well when I've made the records. I think I was making a lot of The Art of Losing when I was on the road with Simple Minds in the sort of the final year that I was with them. And my life was very, very sad and difficult. There was a lot of loss and a lot of difficulty going on. And I'm just much more settled now in my life. And I always think of Hounds of Love by Kate Bush as being a record that came out of what she says is her happiest time in her life, and what a masterpiece that is. And I've never kind of subscribed to the idea that you have to be miserable in order to make great work, because that's one of my favorite records. So it's just not true. She's made her best work when she's been the most contented, the most settled. And there's something to be said for that. It means you can corner off your chaos and your pain and put that into the music then, rather than having it in your personal life. Not that there isn't a lot of pain and trauma in the songs here, but they're in the songs. And I'm able to write those and to create those and put them out because, on the whole, I have a happier life, if that makes sense. I don't know if I answered the question at all there.
No, you did. It was great. The track, What You Did, can you explain a little bit what that's about? Or...
Yeah, so it kind of emanated from the same place as we once were, and really grew out of me thinking about this relationship that I had when I was a very young teenager, with someone that sort of went into my 20s and was quite an impactful relationship, so we say, is a diplomatic way to put it. And I started writing the song a few years ago and kind of trying to make sense of some of the patterns in my life that seem to be repeating. And I guess what you did is kind of focused around this formative relationship when it started when I was a minor, and that the impact of that would kind of echo down the years in terms of how I wasn't always able to tell what a healthy relationship was, but also the impact of some of those actions, what they had on me, in the way that even when I met healthy relationships, I wasn't able to enter into those in a meaningful way, that I would push people away, that I would push away good things out of my life because I didn't recognize them as being love, because I thought that love was supposed to look like that, the wolf in sheep's clothing, as it were. So these two songs are kind of pairs of one another, really. And it's only with all of this distance that I have now that I'm able to look back at that relationship and think about what an impact it has had on my whole life. That first love that we have tells us, or is supposed to tell us, what love is, right? And it echoes across the years. And if that relationship is not a healthy one, and is full of violence and control, then that will obviously impact us in a way that isn't going to be very good for us. And it's interesting, I was talking to my mum about it the other day, and obviously they were there to witness some of this. And I think I've spoken about this on stage before. There was one New Year's Eve where this person held me up against the wall by my neck, threw me up against the wall in front of my dad, and he was ejected from the house, shall we say, rather promptly. But then I went back to this relationship several months later, and I remember saying to my mum, why didn't you say something or do something? And she said, we didn't want to push you further into it, which I think was very sensible, actually, in hindsight, this idea that they understood enough that the more that you try to pull someone apart from somebody else in those teenage years, the more likely actually you might be to lose them completely to that situation. So it must have been a very difficult dance
Hmm.
to do for them. Um, but yeah, as I said, I've spoken about this on stage quite frankly. Obviously, I wouldn't name the person, but I think it's important as someone I think who comes across in public as a very strong and perhaps dominant force, that we realize that these things don't just happen to people who are sort of meek and mild and timid, that often actually these types of people latch on to someone who's a bit more of a challenge. And I've always been a challenge, shall we say. And there's something I think quite satisfying for this type of person in breaking a strong woman, which
Hmm.
I have always been. But I think it's important to disrupt that stereotype that this only happens to people who are weak. And that's not true at all. These things creep up on us because we don't recognize them for what they are. And yeah, it's a subject I'm really passionate about. And I'm so glad that they seem to be talking a lot more about this in schools and in educational settings. We were never taught what coercion or domestic violence was at all of its different forms. I think I've had to learn that the hard way. um, and I'm really glad that you know, they're teaching that now to the younger generation. But I guess this is my way of doing it, is talking about it in songs and then trying to unpack that. And obviously it ends with that line, hell, I'm on to you now. That is defiance. That is saying, but I know now what that is, and I'm not going to let that happen again. Um, and then the second half of the song kind of spirals into this kind of progressive sonic well, this kind of extended coda, which I love, obviously, and get to indulge myself in. Um, and then ends with, there's a quotation from Elizabeth Taylor um, at the end there, "You are not going to destroy me." So it ends with defiance, even if it does expose some of my vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the past, um, which I think probably sums me up as a person, actually. We are all a mixture, aren't we, of our strengths and our weaknesses.
So at the end of that, that's Elizabeth Taylor's voice we can hear.
I'm going to get sued now, aren't I?
I don't think you
It's a
will.
very altered version of it, but yes, it was a quotation from something that I heard her say, and I thought, I need that in my life.
During your time with Simple Minds, how did you approach learning the keyboard parts created by Mick MacNeil?
I mean, it was just a mammoth task, is all I can say. When you're kind of told, here is the possible songs that might be on the set list, and it's a huge amount to learn. And obviously, by the time that I kind of shifted over to keys, I had learned quite a lot of the catalogue already over the previous years, because obviously mine was kind of progressive sort of change of role through time. But I really obviously credit that to where I kind of really deeply got into vintage synthesizers. I don't know if you can see some of them behind. You probably can't see them all actually because my chair is kind of covering them up. But one of the things that I would do on those kind of long, lonely nights on tour would be to get on eBay and start buying, old Italian synths. And a lot of them made their way onto the Art of Losing. And that was completely as a result of having to kind of understand and kind of delve into the sound library in the world that kind of Mick created. I've been lucky, obviously, to meet him a few times and get to talk to him about his work, but never wanted to do anything that was replicating it exactly. But without that, I do wonder if would have flipped my world from someone who was very immersed in guitars, and guitar was my first instrument, to, I think, now sort of people think of the Anchoress as very synth driven. And obviously on this new record, I had the amazing opportunity to create a lot of it at Pete Townsend's studio. So the Townsend studio houses an incredible collection of synthesizers owned by Pete Townsend from across the years, played on the Who records, Quadrophenia soundtracks, etc. And what you hear across this record is a result of me kind of having been let loose in the synth playground and just getting to learn how to use a lot of them, because a lot of them are modular synths, which are quite different to what you would be used to seeing most people play, where you just hit some keys and sounds come out. You have to create and shape the sound yourself. So it's quite it's quite a task and a feat to even get a single sound kind of going. Um, as I say, there's a through line here from being invited to join Simple Minds in 2014 through to this record that I've made 12 years later. I wonder whether I would have landed here or landed in the Townsend Studios had it not been for that kind of baptism by fire of kind of being thrown in at the deep end and kind of going from someone who only heard Don't You Forget About Me, that was the only song that I knew, to having to be like completely immersed in the early catalogue especially, and just being like, wow, this is great, right, I'm gonna start buying some synthesizers. So obviously then being thrown in the deep ends when Andy departed and moving across to keys, and obviously then that having a huge impact upon the music that I've been making in terms of being so synthesizer not led necessarily, but synthesizer padded, I would say. And for those of you who are really keen, I always have very extensive credits in the records talk about which synths are on which tracks, so you can actually see which instruments they are. It doesn't just say synthesizers; it says which particular model I'm using and playing on each and every one. And most of them have got sort of 3 or 4 synths on every track that are kind of layered up, and they're all quite different. It's as different from playing the trumpet and the violin, whether or not you're playing an ARP 2500 or playing a DX1. Yeah, I've become a bit of a synth nerd, so thank you, Mick. Really appreciate that push in the right direction. And this is the thing, like life is a series of dominoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who is to say if I hadn't have worked with Paul Statham all those years ago on the Dark Flowers project, Jim Kerr probably never would have known who I was and invited me to join the band. Had I not then had to step in and kind of learn all of this stuff, would I ever have become obsessed with synthesizers? Probably I would in another way, but we can't say, can we? The way that life leads us down all these pathways. And it's been so lovely that so many of the Simple Minds fans have kind of come along for the journey. There's so many people now that come to shows that I recognise from having met, in interval signings when I supported on the acoustic tour, or have seen like after a show or something like that. So it's really nice. It feels like this family is kind of like a rolling stone gathering moss the whole time, picking up people that want to come along for the ride. And that's the same with the Mannix family as well, because I perform a lot with them as well still. So yeah, it's like this big kind of genetic mix. What is it? Mishmash, I think the word might be, of all of these different bands. I think we all have a lot in common, kind of that working class ethic, that Celtic connection as well. But yeah, it's one big happy family, really.
Just to also, when talking about the synths, going back to, well, as a kind of consequence, really, but there are extra instrumentation on the track. But back to Hand to the Tide, like the instrumentation there and the things that I have heard from it, like this kind of echoes of other songs that I hear in it. So there's like echoes of Björk sounds and Kate Bush sounds. Like I hear, I'm not sure the track that it is that maybe I hear of Kate Bush's, but I hear sort of those kind of echoes in it. Is there a lot of instrumentation on that? It sounds like there is.
I can read you the list. So what I'm playing on that is the CS80 synth from the Townsend Studios, electric guitar, mellotron, percussion, upright piano, obviously. You can hear the piano quite clearly. Selena strings, which are all those kind of swathes of kind of orchestral strings. And obviously all of the voices from the kind of breathy percussiveness, the kind of Kate Bushness that you'll hear, obviously all of the harmonies as well. But then Tim Elsenberg from Sweet Billy Pilgrim was such an integral part of this song. I'd left this song on the shelf for quite a few years because of the subject matter. So it's about the loss of 3 members of my family in a drowning accident. And I think I'd felt really uncomfortable about utilizing that for an album. It's sort of, I wasn't sure about the ethics of it. And so I kind of let it be. And then Tim kind of came on board and really sort of reawakened my interest and passion for it. And there's bowed banjo on there, there's a biscuit tin on there, percussion. There's obviously his great kind of guitar solo in the middle of the song as well. And then you've got Keir Adamson playing drums on there. And it was all kind of brought together by Mick O'Gordon, who works with The Smile, Idols, and Radiohead. He was just the perfect person because it is quite probably the most progressive track that I've ever done. It is 5 minutes 55 long. I think it's super long. And it kind of is quite symphonic, like it goes through all of these different movements, a little bit like classical music. And Nico just really gets this kind of thing. And I think he just made it fly. And I'm usually somebody that goes back with a lot of mixed revisions, and we might get to like mix 8 or 9. And I think with Miko we did it in 2, which is unheard of for me because I'm such a control freak. But yeah, I'm really proud of it, and I guess I've been quite surprised at people's reaction to it as well, because I didn't think of it as necessarily being that much of an accessible song. Like, it's very self-indulgent, it's what I want to do. And it has got that kind of classical structure to it. So I've been really heartened that people have really responded to like the emotional core of the song. That's quite interesting to me, that its depth and complexity hasn't put people off. And I think this is the thing, I think we often do a disservice to music fans and we think, oh, everyone wants a 3-minute pop song. But actually, I think we also want things that take us on a journey, and it's very cinematic. And yeah, I guess sort of it's like theme for actually, I probably shouldn't I don't want to mention them. Actually, I'm not going to say that. We'll stop that there to say there's lots of music from, I think, the late 80s that's trying to be ambitious in this way. I grew up listening to Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, and my dad was a really big fan of Rick Wakeman and Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds and all of that kind of thing. And so that's obviously rubbed off on me. I can't help but for that to be in my DNA too. So yeah, just really pleased that people like it.
You are doing some in-store signing appearances and a full show at the 100 Club. Will there be other shows coming up in the future?
So because I broke my arm in May quite badly, I had to have an operation and have a couple of metal plates put in my arm. It kind of put paid to our or any plan to do a tour this year. So we've just got one album launch show on Saturday, the 22nd of August at the 100 Club in London. And that's going to be a little bit different to what you would normally see me do, because I'm still somewhat restricted in terms of playing. So we've got a little help from my friends, other people kind of stepping in on various things. But I'm doing, rather than sort of acoustic in stores, I was hoping I was going to be able to do this time around, just doing some kind of special album playbacks and signings. And we've got one on Monday the 10th of August at Rough Trade in Denmark Street, which is fully accessible, by the way. And then Wednesday the 12th at Banquet Records in Kingston. So I'm not going too far afield. I'm having to still be really careful and attentive to my physiotherapy and my rehab on my hand. So what was going to be full kind of acoustic in the stores at record shops, I'll have to wait till the next album, I'm afraid, or maybe if I do something else next year. But we do have dates confirmed for 2027. We just didn't want to announce anything until there was any certainty around what was happening, if I had to have any more operations, etc. And I have literally just been signed off by my surgeon. I don't need any more surgery. So we will be announcing those dates, I think probably in September, but they won't be until 2027. But I think that will give people time to live with the album, get to know it, get to fall in love with it, and good things come to those who wait. So yeah, hopefully next year we'll be doing fewer shows at bigger venues. So rather than like 23 dates across the year like we've done previously, it will be big cities, bigger venues, just for logistics. It's it's a lot to tour every night of the week. I've done that. I did it in Simple Minds for 6 years. I did 6 shows a week. It takes its toll on you physically and mentally, and I get to choose as the Anchoress how we tour, and I prefer to do no more than 3 shows in a row and just keep it as fun and enjoyable as possible and as good for everybody's health. So those are the reasons sort of why I make the choices that I do. Now I can. So yeah, watch out for a couple of really big shows that are going to be announced, and be prepared to travel. As difficult as that is, there, as I say, we are unable to, with the band and the lineup as it is. Lots of them have now got very small babies and young children. No one wants to be away for sort of a week at a time. So I hope that people understand and come and support, you know, the way that we're choosing to do it. But I'm really excited. I wish I could tell you.
Excellent. I can't wait. Well, I'll be at the 100 Club, so I'm really looking forward to that. So, thank you for your time, Catherine.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been wonderful.
It's been really lovely to talk about the record. You've asked lots of questions that no one else has asked, and I think I've been quite candid with you as well, which is I feel always nervous when I'm promoting a record because it's like, should I have said that? But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know, As We Once Were is the new album. It's out on August the 7th via Last Night from Glasgow. It's available on lots of different formats. We've got the 2 LP vinyl, which has a 4th leopard print etch side, and that comes in 3 different colorways. It comes in coral, it comes in linen, and if you are buying from an indie record store, it comes in transparent burgundy vinyl. It's also available on 2 CD media book, and that comes with 16 bonus tracks. We have a very special limited cassette album as well in 2 colorways. I think it's apricot and recycled pink, and it comes on standard gatefold CD and download. I think that's it. I feel like I'm on QVC when I say this, but every format that you could want, and all the formats are so beautifully done. The media book with 2 CDs also comes with extensive liner notes, extra photographs. It's got like a 48-page kind of, it looks like a hardback book. It's really gorgeous. It seems to be the most popular format as well, which is quite exciting. And the cassette tape, obviously, we had to do that in homage to my grandmother. That's the first time I've ever done anything on cassette. And it sounds really great because we got it mastered specifically for cassette tape as well. And I love the nostalgia.
Excellent. I have a cassette player, so I did get the cassette.
Oh, exciting. I've only just seen them today and they look really good. I'm kind of like, phew, I'm glad we did that. Well, thank you so much for your time, Larelle. Really appreciate it.